Hello, thank you for waiting on me. I'm sorry about that. I got caught up at school and had to get back home from campus. Um, at any rate, we are looking at the second assignment, and let me write your names down and begin with an opportunity. If anybody has any information, any questions, comments, that's worthwhile for me to hear, for the other students to hear, please by all means speak up. All right, so this is again the second assignment in your History 102 class. So this is the West, and we have it revolving around a popular thesis, right? I try to get some type of discourse going, and I thought that was the one that was the most salient, that stands out the most, was that pertaining to Frederick Jackson Turner and his famous thesis on the West. Okay. So what I do at first, as you may have had the chance to peruse yourself, is I try to defend it at first. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And let's see here. Let's take a look at this first. So the U.S. 19th century colonization of the Far West, right? That it created, that it supposedly refashioned, reopened, reestablished the practice of meritocracy in this country, right? Whereby, regardless of your background, regardless of whatever demographic or category of the society that anyone would put you in, that everyone had an opportunity to rise or fall based upon his or her own merit, right? Hence the term meritocracy. So at any rate, you could make the argument, if you've taken your 101 class, that there was a lot of nepotism. There literally was a patronage system going on with the British when they began colonizing the eastern seaboard, and the Spanish as well. When you look at the Spanish in Florida, in New Mexico, and in California, it was not egalitarian, like everyone on equal footing. It was not democratic. It wasn't intended to be. It was just a different time period, a different day for Euro Americans in the early modern era. And so then, right, we fast forward to the mid to late 1800s, and supposedly all that changes on behalf of the influence of the frontier itself, right? The frontier itself. And so notice, right, that the dangers as well as the opportunities inherent in the Far West supposedly reopened the American dream to be open to everybody. All right. And so what you do is the reason why he puts the opportunities is very self-evident, right? That's the basis of the American dream is to being able to earn or merit a spot up. You need opportunities for socioeconomic ascendance, moving up the chain, the pyramid, right? But with the danger, why would he put the danger? Well, to him, right, it's kind of, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Joseph Campbell and his idea of many religions and many myths from modern to back to ancient history have really prized the idea of the protagonist becoming a better person through trial, through tribulation, through suffering, etc. Right? And of course, you find that in the Bible, in many of the main monotheistic religions as well. And so, at any rate, that's the hence the imposition of the element of dangers. But remember, it fits to his thesis because not only is it nothing ventured, nothing gained, assumption underlying this, right? That those who had gone through great trial in the West and still made it to become rich, to become successful, self-sufficient, have earned that, right? But also because it just, yeah, I mean, it's just mainly that. So when you look at that the dangers are indiscriminate, as are the opportunities, right? That they do not play favorites, the conditions on a frontier. So you have a bit of environmental determinism in this thesis, right? That frontiers will naturally have this effect. So what does he do? Is he gets right into the selection of facts to make the West look very indiscriminately dangerous, right, for anyone and everyone. So you look at the overland trails, right? Those had been hashed out. 1843, the Oregon Trail got big with the Methodists and the Baptists going into the Oregon Territory at that time. And of course, it was preceded by Native American routes. There was also a man named Robert Stewart during the War of 1812 who came backwards from Oregon into Missouri and scouted his place, scouted his route, and attributed to other people, and sold his rights to giving his information, like the later mountain men, as they were called in the 1820s, did. They would tell their stories. They would serve as scouts, right? As a safe leader, showing the right routes to take, left or right, take the river or walk along the river bank or traverse a mountain range, etc. They had to know when and where to do that, how to navigate cultural conflict with Native American tribes, etc. So all of that, right? Flora, fauna, be able to get the sustenance to eat and drink, all that come into play. And so they became famous throughout the 1820s and 30s, these mountain men, to offer their services across the West, to tell their stories of all their trials, right? But also to help the United States government. Literally began subsidizing this with with senators like Benton down in South Carolina, and others who were really big on overland trails. Excuse me. To subsidize this, for the federal government to subsidize movement across the West, right? To provide by way of like the Pony Express beginnings, to have be able to buy or borrow on credit necessary just groceries and supplies every 50 miles, and all that became available through federal help. So at any rate, you have the overland trails and you have weather, you have lightning storms, you have hailstorms, you have the snow, right, with the Donner Party, etc., getting snowed in, and you know what happens with them in 1849. You have the rivers, right, the Snake, the Columbia, the Platte. These other rivers, they sadly were the cause of thousands of drowning episodes. Okay, moving across the West. Native American tribes, some more notorious than others. The Nez Perce, the Blackfoot, the Shoshone up toward the north. And then, of course, you have the Apache, the Comanche, and the Navajo down along the Santa Fe Trail to the south. And then the Mormon Trail going into California in the middle, coming off the Oregon Trail. Not only the Shoshone, as I mentioned, but you had the Crow, the Arapaho, the Sioux, etc. That they many times they would at the very least extort the passersby, right? They would say at gunpoint, give us this, this, and this that's in your present possession, or else we'll kill you right here and now on the spot. And so then you had people writing constitutions promising to adhere to a certain type of government and obedience to certain leaders. These are all informal, but they're to be recognized in courts, okay, where they write their own laws and so forth on sharing the food, etc. And so this was seen as a an improvisational reaction to all these problems of the settlers. They're saying, hey, we got to band together. We got to make plans. We got to really think this out, or else we're not going to make it. And so that all these things are evidence of many dangers that virtually anyone could and often did face moving along across the West. Okay, so you not only had those, but then you had areas in which the West and time periods in certain areas in which the West was literally without institutions, right? So going back to this, this is Louisiana territory coming up about right here, all the way up through right here. This huge swath all in here was the Louisiana Purchase, right? And very few of them, as you see here, Kansas, Indian Territory, or Oklahoma, had been established by the end of the Civil War. And so a lot of this was still open. And according to the Northwest Ordinance, there were to be strict requirements that were to be met before they could be accepted by the Congress as a new state, right? So all these new states yet to be carved out. And with California, right, is you may know is that with the fall of Mexican California, they signed it over on February 2nd, 1848. And when was gold found? 8 days prior. Just 8 days prior, just a week prior, January 24th, 1848. And so that did not bode well for the Californios, the ethnic Mexican Californians, right? You had the Bear Flag Revolt against Vallejo and taking him hostage. And you had the entrance of Redfield Stockton, all these other Kearney, a guy named Kearney, and all these other federal military officers that came in and put martial law on these California cities like Los Angeles. And so it was pretty ugly and confrontational, this American gringo takeover. And then to make matters worse is that Polk, right, declares California and the area open and taken from Mexico in the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. He declares it open season, open public domain for all to take. And that was not to be that it intended to be, right? The Northwest Ordinance, going back to Jefferson, was supposed to be very methodical and surveying out parcels of land, 6-acre square lots. So many of those make a city, so many make a county, so many of those make a state. The selling to the highest bidders, in some cases at a standard market price. The land was to be offered at auction to buy. Not all of that was circumvented. It is all went around because he said, go ahead and just go for the gold. So he started a mad dash, President Polk, that exacerbated things, that made the violence of everything and the hostility and the level of competition that much more intense. And so you have your cases, right? Joaquin Murrieta, Tiburcio Vasquez, these other Mexican like bandidos, as they were called. They were tired of the gringos coming in and taking all their land, now taking all their gold, etc. You had drama just here in nearby Sonora between the Anglos and the Hispanics, and it all became very messy. And so that in these areas, right, you didn't have you hadn't carved out a municipality, a city yet, a county yet, etc. And so there was obviously no municipal police department. There was no sheriff department, right? Nothing yet, while it was under territorial status, okay, until 1850, California at least, for 2 years. And so at any rate, that just lends credence, arguably, to this thesis that the West was wild And it's what we like to watch, right? It's what we like to watch in the movies, or read in books, etc. I don't know if it gives us catharsis, for a place where there's no inhibition and it's just each man and woman for him or herself. I don't know. I can't imagine. I don't know a philosophical and psychological take on this, on America's fixation with this Western motif, but it's there. We know that. And so, at any rate, that lends credence to this thesis, right? And so you have cases, as you see here, the Dalton gang. They were run down by family members of people whom they had killed in their robbings, and chased them all the way down to the Mexican border and killed them, and then paraded their bodies for everyone else to see as a deterrent, to tell everybody you better not mess with people of Kansas, etc. You had just case after case of outlaws fighting against sheriffs. And so then what the government would do is they would send all the way from Oklahoma, right, from all the way here in Indian Territory. They'd send them all the way in to New Mexican Territory, Nevada, Utah Territory, all over here into the far west. And they would send deputies and marshals, and they would tell them, right, here's a list of people, here's a description of them, please bring them back dead or alive. And there was one famous hanging judge in Oklahoma who would actually even at times tell his marshal or deputy, you know what, there's been so much talk, there have been so many accusations against this person, the accusations must be true, so go ahead and just shoot them on the spot. So much for due process in some cases. All right. So all this goes into his thesis, right? That this is a rough, wild, dangerous realm, this frontier, this Western frontier. So at any rate, you have cases that if I wanted to bore you, I could make other example. I could give you other examples of such. Okay. The cattle towns and the mining towns in particular, right? When they opened up, they developed a reputation for boisterous and criminal activity, right? With the cattle towns, they were paid in some cases in the 1870s up to $75 a steer, one head of steer, 75 back then. That was a fortune. And so you can make great quick money, right? And going up the famous Chisholm Trail of Texas, for instance, and going finding, because Rutherford B. Hayes and other presidents had declared fair game to the roaming cattle that went back all the way to 1540 with the Spanish and a guy named Coronado bringing the cattle up here from Mexico. And so now they're roaming free, and of course, provided illegally that they're not branded yet, they were free for the taking, just as gold was free for the taking in California and in South Dakota, etc. So at any rate, they come in and they become nouveau riche, right? These young men who are willing to venture the hazards of this profession, because remember, you have people waiting in the ravines, right? The little canyons dug deep into mountain sides, whereby you could become vulnerable to people up higher than you, up on the mountainsides. They knew where these arroyos were that made people most vulnerable. And you would come to that certain spot and people would, quote, get the drop on you, as the jargon was of that day. And they would force you to either give it on pain of death, or they would just kill you and take your cattle. And so it was not easy. And then, of course, you had a guy named Clifford Westermeyer, and other historians, Candy Moulton, who give us stats on people getting gored to death by buffalo or by cattle, freezing to death, dying of hypothermia, drowning in the rivers, etc., etc. That there were a lot of natural disasters that happened as well that came as threats and possibilities with this job. But boy, if you made it to the nearby cattle towns in Kansas, etc., right? You would sell them per head and make cash money right there on the spot. And then you had entrepreneurs by way of the press and so forth, who would hear of these cattle depots, and they would develop all kinds of businesses of course, try to strip you of your money as soon as you earned it. So you had, and then it was the proverbial things that you see in movies. You had the casinos, you had the brothels with prostitutes, you had all just a variety of you had a theater, etc., right, whereby people would try to get you to spend your money. And so that did happen. And also getting the men together demographically with such a huge majority of males over females, so many of them young relatively, it just lent to stereotypical results, like a lot of competition, a lot of strife, a lot of fighting, including gunfights. Okay, because almost everyone was armed in this time and area. So you have Dodge City, right? Became infamous, and other cities. You have Bear River, Tom Bear River Smith, Wild Bill Hickok, these other guys, right, who became famous for fighting off this lawlessness, right, as these tough guys, etc. And Tom Bear River Smith would end up getting killed. He got ambushed by some criminals, whom he chased into a cabin and was beheaded. In grisly fashion, they displayed his head to try to, send the message that law and order were not to prevail in Dodge City. So at any rate, there is some semblance of truth to what you see greatly exaggerated in the Western movies, cinema. All right, so you have all that going on, but then also, right, you also have the economic opportunities, right? The economic opportunities. So first of all, right, oftentimes one of the first opportunities mentioned in his book and mentioned by other historians who kind of adhere to this kind of Turner thesis, right, of the West, is this entrepreneurial, right? Business oriented, right? If you were smart enough, if you had enough common sense and were quick enough on your feet to ascertain a way of providing a good or service to people that was coveted, then there you had it. So, for instance, something as simple as taking people's mail, their letters back to loved ones, right? And walking them back to the closest Pony Express station, right? Which were to be stationed every 50 miles across the overlands of the plains of the West. People charged oftentimes $3 a letter, which was pretty good and added up pretty well back then. You had people like the Mormons who made good money, lucrative money, with their services of ferries across treacherous rivers to keep people from drowning, right? Because remember, oftentimes it's not like the conquistadors, in their equivalent of their West here in Mexico and in Mesoamerica and the Caribbean is and South America is they came oftentimes demographically as young unmarried men, like the cowboys, right, across into the West. But a lot of people who went all the way were traveling just not just to find the cattle and bring them into a cattle town, not just as a miner to head straight to a mining town, but simply as settlers making it across the country into the West. A lot of them came as families, right? Husband, wife, and children, nuclear families. And so in doing so, they're more vulnerable, right? They're more apt to pay for people to protect them, for people to ferry them across rivers, et cetera, right? And of course, people were desperate enough. There wasn't a good currency exchange system at this time, so people resorted to bartering, etc. But one way or another, you could enrich yourself, if you had the know-how to improvise quickly when you saw a demand of any sort. And then those who cooked and cleaned, uh, had you know, a multi-room building built, and then you could lodge renters, right, coming into mine, etc. There was money to be had in, quote, what some people would call mining the miners, right, or taking advantage of the cowboys, etc. So entrepreneurial ways existed for sure, for virtually anyone um, who was able to do so quickly, all right, and shrewdly. And then the minerals, right? When you look at the Mexican um, newspapers of California, right, and you look at the Alta California, which is the name of California as opposed to Baja California, right? There was the Alta California, there was the oh, shame on me. There were three or four that were pretty big newspapers, and they all attest to the fact that in 1848, right, that a lot of people were making quick, easy, incredible money. Okay, that no capital was needed as far as machinery, uh, education, the acquisition of skills in mining, etc. And that not much time was needed either. That people were getting this placer gold of California straight from the riverbeds and the ores coming out of the mines. Okay, and so you have that, and then you've seen the way that sometimes they began to get creative. They would meet together, and they had the sluice box that they would rock back and forth. They had the long toms with the cleated troughs that would go down the mountainsides and collect all the substances and let the water rush and get all the granular sand and have it move on beyond it, so you can catch the rocks as well as the fool's gold as real as the real stuff, right? The Spaniards came in, especially the Chileans, and they introduced mercury, right, or quicksilver, and that was a quick way of finding out if the gold was real or fool's gold. And so people were quick on their feet as well. So through mineral wealth, you had these cattle barons, right? These bonanza kings who made it very well for themselves and their loved ones. John Mackay, James Fair, James Flood, William O'Brien, just to name a few, right? Yeah, we already talked about this, marshals, the blurred lines of law and order and so forth. There at the top is the one that you may not know. That is Hardin, John Wesley Hardin. They think he killed anywhere from 6 to 8 lawmen before he was killed. And he was infamous for shooting a man at a hostel for snoring and killing him. And then, of course, you had, the Tombstone story, right, with Wyatt Earp there at the left. And then Billy the Kid on the right, who's covered up by our names. Billy the Kid, right? When you look at the Lincoln County Wars in New Mexico, you see this type of Darwinian competition, right? Where there was a well-to-do Scottish man, and he had bought himself a substantial head of cattle and acreage, and he was employing these young men like young Billy the Kid. And then you also have other people who like Murphy, who were kind of, they utilized their connections, they utilized their wealth to buy patronage, to buy the first opportunity to provide their cattle to the armed forces, to sell their cattle on the market to the people at an extortionately high price, etc. And the Scottish gentleman came in and became a thorn in their side, and so they flagrantly had him murdered publicly, and with no repercussions, because the local sheriff and aldermen, etc., were crooked and in with the Murphy gang. And so that's when Billy the Kid becomes famous and forming the regulators and fighting against them. So notice, right, that in the West, right, there was such a state of chaos, of anarchy, right, of hyper competition and almost amoral competition in a Darwinian way, that it set the stage for this type of thesis, right? That the West was equally wild and dangerous for everyone, but if you were just smart enough, if you were just tough enough, if you were just lucky enough, you could find your way upwardly. All right. And so then you have the overland trails, you have the homestead acts. So that's another thing, was land. You have lots of opportunities in the history of the mid to late 1800s to demonstrate how land in the West became very lucratively priced and abundantly offered. All right. And the biggest example, arguably, would be the Homestead Act of 1862. Sometimes you may have to pay $10 for different fees, but oftentimes people got around that $10 fee, which of course was much more back then, but it still was feasible. But other than that, for free, you received 160 acres of land in Nebraska and other areas around the upper plains. Look at this, 400,000 families. 400,000 families, almost 500,000, received free land from the federal government via this program, right? And look, over 300,000 were Danish, right? From the 1860s and 1900, Norwegians, right? Swiss. So a lot of immigrants, right? From Scandinavian countries, from Russia and Lithuania, and other areas that just happen to have push factors at this time that were kind of pushing them out of their home countries. You had the failed uprisings in Germany of 1848. And so you had a lot of Germans come in at this time as well and receive land, etc. All right, so you have that. Yeah, so I mentioned the Germans here. And when they came, they did well for themselves, right? They formed fraternal societies, they formed businesses. So, of course, the Germans with the beer, right? With the stereotypical um, art, the artisanship, and with woodwork, with the Germans. Also their inventions, also their education, their music, etc. A lot of them made a living doing all those things, right? And so they came with skills, with capital, with money to begin with, that gave them a leg up against other immigrants, these German immigrants of the mid to late 1800s. All right. And then you see here relative equality of opportunity in the West. Russians, Poles, Austrians, Romanians, Slovaks, Serbs, Croatians, right? The Jewish population. Okay, they were coming in large numbers, right? Into the West. The Italians. Okay. So you see there, there's just one thing after another with their banks, their businesses, etc. They made a name for themselves very quickly within a generation or two. Okay. And then we already mentioned the cattle industry. Look at this, cattle free to $10 a head to up to 75 a head in Eastern markets. Wow, right? So then we move to opposition. So let me go ahead and stop sharing this. Let's go to the paper itself, right? So now you have this. All right, so does anybody have any questions or comments on number one? All right, can I get a thumbs up that you guys could have been able to hear me and follow with me? Thank you. Thank you, James. Appreciate that. All right, so good. All right, and then Kaylin, I didn't have your name down. That's good to have you. So let's see here. Number two, the title says it all, right? As remember, Karl Marx and Marxist historiography or history writing, it operates from the assumption, right, that to understand human history is to understand the fight, the struggle, the competition over the means of production, right? That everyone basically need their primal needs met, food and shelter, etc., right? And that therefore the key to power, the key to manipulative domination, the key to a higher lifestyle, etc., are found, right? Is found in competing over obtaining the means of producing food, shelter, the means of subsistence, right? To people. And to them, they especially think that the capitalist system is a ruse, right? They believe that it pretends to be open for everyone, right? That there's this free, open, uh, you know, um, without government regulation, this laissez-faire, let it be, right? Let the economy be a competitive atmosphere. But to them, they believe that it's a rigged system, right? Like those of you who may believe that, that somehow uh, casinos have it rigged as to which machines and which tables and to how much money they're willing to allow people to win just to keep their hope up. But they make sure that most of the time the house wins and they take the money from these gullible, hopeful gamblers. And so that's how they feel in Marxist history, right? And so they believe the story of American history, because it has been involved with a capitalist economy, is even more so than usual a history of oligarchic exploitation. Remember, oligarchy is Aristotle's idea of a few characterization of a few people, a wealthy elite who rule at the expense of the majority, right? And that's what they think. And so, especially at this time, when you see on the East Coast, you see the Rockefellers and these other robber barons that we're going to get into next. To them, to the critics of Turner's thesis, this first group of economic historians say the West was no different. The West was no different. It was not special, as Turner would have us believe, in that it allowed equality of opportunity for everybody. But instead, it was rigged as well. And those who already had capital, those who already had money to play with, prevailed over those who didn't. The big guys gobbled up the small ones, period. Right? So, at any rate, when you look at the West, where do you find evidence of that? Well, for one, I started with the mining rushes, like the gold rush. And according to Larry Schweikart, his Patriots History of the U.S., when you look at Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N, of course, his history, right? And other, quote, revisionist historians who want to revise the romantic renditions of certain American topics, right? These revisionist historians, they highlight the fact that those who had the skill, those who had the money to buy the expensive machinery, etc., had a huge advantage over those who didn't. And that it was that simple. It came down to money and political connections, right? And so when you look there, you see with mineral wealth, notice I mentioned that with the Spanish-speaking newspapers, with the gold rush, they boasted of how easily, right, how easily garnered the gold was by whomever with little to no, machinery, knowledge of mining, etc. But notice they were in a very limited time period in 1848. The famous 49ers, 1849, over 80,000 of them registered over the Oregon Trail alone, and just that year alone. So when that many people came, right, like any commodity, it becomes exhausted with such high numbers. And then a lot of people, not everyone gets a chance at a piece of the pie because there's just too many of them and not enough gold to go around. So then when they come in, right, you have people like the gentleman in Nevada, the Silver Duke. Oh, don't fail me now. At any rate, the most famous name connected to this, I can't believe this. I read a book on it, and his name is eluding me right now. I apologize. But at any rate, there was a gentleman in Nevada, and he got connections with a couple judges who gave him permission to use actual government and soldier help and muscle to kick all of these, quote, squatters out of this silver mining area for him and his corporation alone. So we call that political capital, right? Having the political connections to beat out your competitors, right? And so that's crazy that a single person has the ability to do that. So that helped. That helped the rich, needless to say, right? And then you also had the fact that most of the wealth extracted from the mines, and this comes from Alan Brinkley's textbook, who tries to stay very middle of the road in all his depictions of everything, is not provocative in any of his theses, because he wants to be chosen as he wants his textbook to be chosen. So you don't want to offend anybody, right? Kind of like a politician. So textbooks are more middle of the road usually in their interpretations, and he's no different. But even he states that as a fact, most of the mineral wealth extracted from American mines came deep within the veins of mines that could not be reached by a mere human being holding a pickaxe. But instead, they needed pneumatic, air-powered, and hydraulic, water-powered drills, okay, that were, 2 stories tall, looked like big oil derricks, blowing into the sides, blasting into the sides of the mountains, etc. Those are what extracted most of the wealth. You think the average person had the money, or even the collateral to borrow enough money to get a pneumatic or hydraulic drill? No, that was the answer to that clearly is no. Of course not. Okay. So at any rate, you have that going on. And then you also have, like I mentioned, with political capital, right? Is what better example of that than we have with the railroads? The railroads, right? They would receive subsidies, and this goes all the way back to Hamilton and the presidency, the very first presidency of Washington, is they would contend, right, that they are providing a product or a good or a service that is beneficial to the entire United States, right? And thereby is worthy of receiving financial help from the government. Because the assumption is, right, is that people are going to want to do whatever yields the quickest and easiest profit. And so something like building railroad tracks across the country, they're going to have to spend so many millions of dollars before they can even put a single product or good or human being on that railroad and charge that person or the people with the from that produce to begin to make their money back. That's just extreme case of deferred gratification, right? So they said, no way, people wouldn't want to do that on their own. But two things changed. One is you had the modern corporation, and we'll talk about that more next week. But secondly, is you have the government subsidizing them, helping them out, giving them an incentive to keep going. So they had certain amount of acreage they would grant railroads for building along flat land. Then they had a higher amount of acreage that they would pay railroads for building through desert land. Okay. And then they had the highest amount of acreage per mile that they would give to the railroad for building through mountainous terrain. All right. And so what's the problem is people bribed from the very beginning. They would have land that they were working on just as flat as a desktop, and they would get the surveyors to mark down that the land that they were developing, that mile, that 10 miles, those 20 miles on, was mountainous. So then the government would promise to give them even more acreage of land around those tracks to do as they please with, right? And they knew what they were going to do is they were going to sell that land. They were going to put it up for public auction to sell to the general public and make a lot of money from and help them financially incur the losses that are inherent as the overhead or price of, paying all your thousands of workers and doing all that. So at any rate, when you have that, right, in the case of that, you have you look at the Transcontinental Railroad. Okay, the Transcontinental Railroad on the West Coast, you have evidence of complete exploitation of Chinese laborers, right? Coming from Sacramento, heading into Utah. And so, for instance, you had the Strangers from a Different Shore. Okay. Very, very good book on Asian American history. Okay. And in that, you'll find plenty of evidence of how they were exploited. So to the extent of 1,000, close to 1,400 Chinese laborers lost their lives, gave their lives with the railroad itself. They had to do the most dangerous jobs. They'd put them in little baskets and put them down the mountainsides and have them put nitroglycerin sticks into the side of the mountain and hope to pull them up in time so that they would not be killed in the explosion that they were told to engage. And so you had snow slides, you had all kinds of issues that happened that they faced, right? They tried to go on strike for better pay, and they wouldn't do it. Their employers would not give in. They threatened to leave them out in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, and it was to no avail. And so a lot of mistreatment toward these Chinese laborers who were calling, right, from the Guangdong province of China. They were calling this place Gamsan. They're calling the country the Golden Mountain, right? Where they become rich. And a lot of them quickly became disillusioned with that idea, with the way that they were exploited as laborers. And so you have that that happening with the eastern end of the Transcontinental Railroad. You have a lot of false notifications. Okay, so for one, at one time, I believe they really were planning on building a bridge, okay, a terraced bridge, and then something changed. They found a way of getting around it, okay, and no longer were doing it. So instead of being honest and giving that money back to the government, because they were given money to build that bridge, okay, they decided not to. They did not give the money back. They did not report it to the government, but instead they made up a phony company headed by members of themselves, right? And put that money into their account and contended that that company engaged in building that bridge, which never really existed, right? And so this became a big scandal, and with Durant and the other leaders of the railroad syndicate. And then if you'll give me one more, is with the Santa Fe and Topeka Railroad. It was coming into Southern California, and there was a place called Muscle Slough, and there were migrants or pioneers who had come prior to the railroads and claimed that land and began farming on it. They contended that no one else contested for it. No one else was owning, claiming it, farming it, etc. prior to them. So they asked to be granted that land as squatters, along with their squatter rights, which, of course, if you've done History 101, it goes back to at least as early as the 1820s with Andrew Jackson and his administration, granting, basically in return for poor white men's votes, granting easy squatter rights to land, right, that initially didn't belong to them. So they felt entitled to this because a local judge acknowledged their claim over that land by the improvements that they had done to it and farming it. Well, the Topeka comes in then and said the Santa Fe and says, sorry guys, you're in the line of our tracks. You must leave. And they said, no, that's silly. Here's our evidence of ownership. The local judge has granted it. We're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. To which the other gentlemen, they flexed on them, right? And said, well, you might have a local judge, but we have federal Congress. And here on this paper saying the land for these tracts and so much in acreage surrounding these tracts are granted to us, right? And of course, the federal Congress trumps a local judge's decision. So at any rate, they still refuse to leave. So they used their political capital, this railroad, and got a marshal and deputy, as well as soldiers from a local post, to come in and actually fight with these guys, have like a shootout with them, to kick them off the Muscle Slough land. And so it's crazy. It's just crazy. But it demonstrates, right, this contention by revisionists that those who had money, those who had political connections, had opportunities, had an advantage that their poorer counterparts never had, okay, and couldn't compete with. So those are a couple examples, okay, that are used in this section to contend that the West, just like anywhere else, became the playground for the wealthy to flex their muscles over the poor. And then also with cattle ranches and farms, is in 1873 you had the invention of barbed wire, and that became a very visible symbol of the rich and their domination of the West. They began to just simply buy more land, right, than their competitors could. The cattle ranchers could hire more men, right, to capture more cattle and have it branded when that cattle opening was offered, right, with Rutherford B. Hayes and other American leaders. They were on a larger Walmart-like scale, right? And so when you look at Texas and cattle ranchers, you find these names that stand out that that owned millions of acreage. And the small guys just couldn't contend. They just couldn't compete against it, right? And so and the same thing with farmers, and then they put up their barbed wire. The farmers, right, again, could pay for the mechanical reapers, the mechanical threshers, the harvester combines, and other type of machinery that was allowing the rich farmers to have a huge advantage in farm efficiency over their smaller competitors, right? And then if that wasn't bad enough, when you have the middlemen, right, like the railroads, like the storage facilities that would pay, that would I'm sorry, not pay, that would charge the farmers, right, and ranchers for stocking their cattle, for storing their almonds or whatever fruit that they had, commodity, right? Is there were no rules against this, you guys. Is they would cut deals with the rich, and the rich would say, okay, you get to charge me per pound, right? So I'm offering you thousands of pounds to which you could charge me, per pound. And so what's in it for me? I'll go to another middleman to store my stuff, or to have my stuff, transported from here to there. And so then these middlemen, beginning like making deals beginning with people like Rockefeller, said, okay, fine, I'll cut you a 65% rebate, right? Or 50% rebate, so that I'll charge you a half of what I charge everybody else per pound. And the small farmers find out about this and they're furious. And they demand some type of legislation, some type of law that states that that is unfair, that that is illegal, to charge different prices for different clients or customers. Okay. So then number 3, right, is ethnic history critique of Turner's thesis. And this one, quite simply, right, is it demonstrates the ways in which Hispanic or Latino American people and Asian American people were deliberately marginalized, right? And by marginalized, I mean that they were kicked to the corner. They were deliberately deprived of the same opportunities that other people had. It was as if, right, like you have this great race, right, symbolized by the American dream, and then you have everyone in his or her lane, but with the Hispanics and the Asians, they put hurdles in their lanes. They gave them a backpack filled with weight that they had to run with, and their Anglo counterparts had nothing. No hurdle to jump over, no weight to carry, could simply run the 100-meter dash unencumbered. And so that's, kind of my cheesy analogy to number 3, right? Is that contending that, remember, because it's all revolves around the Turner's thesis, this assignment. And this says, no, we don't buy it either. Just like number 2, we don't believe in Turner's thesis. We don't believe that the West offered equality of opportunity. Just look at these 2 demographics alone, Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans, and look at the efforts that were brought upon them to keep them from succeeding in this country. So you're the 2 categories, right, are de jure and de facto. De jure is by law. So you're going to find actual laws that forced taxes, etc., just on Hispanic minors, just on Asian minors, etc. And laws like later on the Alien Labor Act of 1913, that Asians cannot buy and own farmland in California. And so those are very overt, right? They're so obvious. But also de facto, right? Things that happen just in the social, cultural realm that you could not find evidence of on a piece of paper as overtly as you can a law, a discriminatory law, but they were just as strong. So popular prejudice, right? So attacks upon Hispanic Americans and literally chasing them out for their lives in the mines, right? And the Chileans as well for succeeding so well. You have the failure and refusal of employers to hire Hispanic or Asians, or when they did, right, it often backfired because there was a very kind of populist outcry that these foreigners are stealing our jobs, right? So then they paid for it with the general public. After that, labor unions refused to grant them entry and acceptance into them, okay, etc. And then people, when they did hire them, they paid them not as much as they would their Anglo-American counterparts, and they oftentimes would not allow them to rise up the political chain of command, right, at the workplace. They would have this, as they use the term with women, this glass ceiling, right? It was glass, metaphorically, because they didn't have to actually write a law and say, we will not grant an opportunity for any of our Hispanic workers to become, an overseer who would make more money, right, and become like a middleman manager at the factory or on the farm, etc. But they just simply didn't do it. So the ceiling was there, nevertheless, you just couldn't see it legally. So hence the term glass ceiling. All right. And so anyway, look at for that if you choose number 3, okay, that show ways in which by law and by just de facto, by just in the social area category of history, people mistreated these 2 groups deliberately. All right. And again, back to that idea of stealing our jobs, right? I find that very interesting because with the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, of 1882, it actually has it has stereotypes in it, in the verbiage of that law made by Congress. But one of the stereotypes is a positive one, ironically. It states that the Asian workers are ideal workers. They're efficient. They're diligent. All right, so efficient is they get the job done quickly. They're diligent and that they're hardworking and they do a thorough job, right? And that they are docile. And docile is they do as they're told and they don't rebel and they don't cry and whine for better conditions. So hence they're the perfectly exploitable worker, right? And they said, therefore, they're stealing white men's jobs, and we must do something about it. And by the way, the second stereotype that they used in the Chinese Exclusion Act was that they were unassimilable. Okay. And unassimilable, right? Remember, to assimilate is to drop your own culture, your own way of doing things, your own behavior, etc., and embrace that of your host country. And they said that they're unwilling and unable to assimilate to Anglo-America. They're too foreign. They're too different. All right. And then you also had fears of, I kid you not, this horrible, just base term that was used back then is the mongrelization of America. They're afraid that Hispanic and Asian men were going to marry Anglo women and have, quote, biracial children and ruin the supposed Anglo-Saxon stock of American DNA. All right. So now you go back to number one and you think, well, did he prove it well? That the Western frontier reopened American meritocracy, that anyone could rise by merit because of the indiscriminate dangers and the indiscriminate opportunities that the Western frontier provided? Was it limitedly correct? And it just conveniently omitted facts from numbers 2 and 3? Do you think numbers 2 and 3, or one or the other, render number 1 completely, unworthy of your credence, of your belief? All right. So you guys feel okay on this assignment? Any thumbs up or any comments? Thank you, Alondra. Yeah, make sure those of you who came in later, make sure that I notice it, okay? And you get your extra credit points for being here. I'm still just writing down a few more. Okay, guys, so if there aren't any other comments or questions, that's it for me today. That's it for me this week, okay? So just keep all of this into consideration, no matter which one you choose. Because for one, all of them are applicable to test one. And secondly, I'd like your evaluation of whichever 1 through 3 that you choose to be informed, right? As to why you do or do not believe that given section to be credible. But if there aren't any questions, you guys, that's it. And please remember, okay, I hope you received my my message. Make sure that by Sunday at noon, because technically you have Sunday till midnight, but make sure that by this Sunday at noon, you have submitted at least 1 or 2, assignment 1 or assignment 2. And if not, for whatever reason, you're unable to get either of them in by noon of Sunday, please send me a Canvas message, giving me your name and asking me not to drop you. Okay. To me, that just doesn't make any sense why we can't at least wait 2 weeks to have our 2 full weeks to have our census report. But I don't call the shots. I do as I'm told. All right. And so I can't wait until midnight. If you have not done assignment 1 and you have not submitted assignment 2 by noon, and I have not received a message from you in Canvas not to drop you, then you're in danger of me dropping you as a no-show, okay? Because I have to do about noon. I have to drop any no-shows. And it's tougher to do with the online class. But I have your names here, and seeing these names alone, I'm not going to drop anybody on this list. So you're actually not the audience I need to be saying this to. All right, well, you guys have a good week, okay? You guys take care, and good luck on this.